This is it. After months of teaser trailers, blog posts, and even the occasional leak, we can finally reveal firm, hard facts about Xbox Series X. In fact, it doesn't really get better than this. We visited the Microsoft mothership in Redmond, Washington. We saw the unit, handled it, played it, and even constructed it from its component parts. We've seen the NVMe SSD expandable storage. We've had our first taste of hardware-accelerated ray tracing on next-gen console, and we've witnessed how one of Microsoft's most talented developers is looking to enhance one of the most technically impressive games available today to leverage the power of the new Xbox. We've had a taster of some brilliant backwards compatibility features, and yes, we've seen the final, official specification for Xbox Series X. Put simply, if you have any passing interest in next-generation Microsoft hardware, this is the video you've been waiting for. So check this out. You may have seen it before. It's the Project Scarlet SoC, system on chip, the silicon heart of the Xbox Series X. 15.3 billion transistors in this one, and yet by and large pretty much the same size as its predecessor, the Scorpio engine found in Xbox One X, which only featured 7 billion transistors. Now that's because the new chip is based on a new production process that allows for pretty much twice the transistor density, a refined, enhanced version of the 7 nanometer technology AMD has used so successfully for its Navi and Zen 2 GPU and CPU products. But it's specs that you're here for, and I've got the complete lowdown right here. Now, we kind of know the basics already. We've got customized Zen 2 CPU cores integrated into the chip alongside 12 teraflops of GPU compute power. Well, that's now locked at 12.155 teraflops, but regardless, let's kick off by taking a deeper look at the CPU side of the equation, where we have a ton of new information. As expected, we're getting 8 CPU cores and 16 threads delivered via 2 quad-core units on the silicon, with 1 CPU core, or 2 threads, reserved for running the underlying operating system and the shell, the front end. Microsoft is promising a 4 times improvement in both single core and overall throughput compared to Xbox One X. And CPU speeds are impressive, with a peak 3.8 GHz frequency. Now this is when SMT or hyperthreading is disabled. Curiously, developers can run with 8 physical cores at the higher clock, or all cores and threads can be enabled with a lower 3.6 GHz frequency. Those clocks are completely locked and won't adjust according to load or thermal conditions, a point that, curiously, Microsoft emphasized several times across our visit. So this is the first big surprise. In our PC-based tests, SMT-enabled delivers anything up to 30% or more of additional performance in well-threaded applications, and that includes games. However, for launch titles at least, Microsoft expects developers to opt for the higher 3.8 GHz mode with SMT disabled, simply because console game engines for the current generation are designed for 7 cores and 7 worker threads. With SMT off, those engines can map directly onto the same 7 cores with Series X, but with a huge performance boost. But it's graphics power that tends to be the focus of any console spec, and we finally know how. Microsoft is delivering its 12.155 teraflops, 3,328 shaders allocated to 52 compute units, operate at a sustained, locked 1825 MHz. There are actually 56 CUs on the silicon, but 4 are deactivated to allow for imperfect chips from the production line to make it into retail consoles. So yeah, Microsoft actually seemed very keen once again to stress that all clocks in all areas are locked. There's no boost clock or anything like that. The firm believes that a core tenet of the console experience is consistent level performance on every box out there. PC GPUs can throttle back depending on thermal conditions, but the point is that Series X won't. But is 12 teraflops truly enough for a next-gen experience? Well, it's at this point that we need to explain once again that compute isn't the defining characteristic of performance, only one of them. I mean, this Witcher 3 benchmark, based on various AMD technologies with various compute levels, demonstrates this quite spectacularly. And yeah, we've demonstrated across the months that AMD's RDNA architecture offers substantially more performance for your teraflop compared to the old GCN. Series X is indeed based on the more modern RDNA 2, of course, with further advantages, but the point is that there are kind of like multipliers that should come into effect through the use of new features baked into the design, such as variable rate shading, which basically attempts to increase and decrease rendering precision based on visibility. All of this needs to be supported by a robust memory bandwidth subsystem. Okay, so one of the key takeaways for me about the Series X silicon isn't just the power, but also the efficiency in overall design. And this required some innovation. Facing signaling issues with high-speed GDDR6 on a wide 384-bit interface, Microsoft innovated with a 320-bit solution that mixes 6 2GB memory modules with 4 1GB chips. Yup, we can finally explain why the Project Scarlet teaser video from way back mixed and matched its RAM setup. So Microsoft has an asymmetrical memory setup here. The machine has 16 gigs of memory in total, with 10 gigabytes of it running at 560 gigabytes per second. This is Series X's so-called GPU optimal memory. 6 gigs runs at a slower 336 gigabytes per second. So ideally, all graphics processing should take place in the GPU optimal space, while aspects such as CPU, audio and I/O would take place in the standard pool. The 6 gigs of standard memory is in itself split up. 2.5 gigs of it is used by the underlying operating system, 3.5 gigs of it is for games. Bottom line then, 2 memory pools, 13.5 gigabytes total for games to access. Still presents to developers as unified memory, but obviously performance varies depending on which pool is accessed. So why do this? Well, I was told pretty clearly by Xbox system architect Andrew Goosen that this innovation was required to achieve the best performance possible while building a console that would actually work and could actually ship. So pretty crucial then. And yeah, the proof is in the pudding, right? So look, this is RDNA 2 architecture, packed with a ton of forward-looking features, but even early ports from existing Xbox One X games that don't access new technological features are already producing some fascinating results. So this is a Series X port of Gears 5 produced in just 2 weeks. So yeah, the development studio, the Coalition, worked directly with Epic Games in getting Unreal Engine 4 operating on Series X, then simply upped all of the internal quality presets to the equivalent of PC's Ultra, adding improved contact shadows and UE4's brand new software-based ray-traced screen space global illumination technology, which is capable of some stupendously impressive results. On top of that, Gears 5's cutscenes, which ran at 30 frames per second on Xbox One X, are upped to a flawless 60 frames per second on Series X. Now, we're going to be covering more on this soon. Trust me, John and Alex are all over this one, but there was one startling takeaway. We were shown results based on Gears 5's internal benchmark that showed that this 2-week-old, unoptimized port was already delivering equivalent performance to the same game running on PC at the same settings with an RTX 2080. Clearly, this is an impressive showing for a game that hasn't even begun to access the next generation features of the new GPU. Right now, it's difficult to accurately quantify the kind of improvement to visual quality and performance we'll see over time, because while there are obvious parallels to current gen machines, the mixture of new hardware and new APIs allows for very different workloads to run on a GPU. Machine learning is a feature we've discussed in the past, most notably with NVIDIA's Turing architecture and the firm's DLSS AI upscaling. The RDNA 2 architecture used in Series X does not have Tensor Core equivalents, but Microsoft and AMD have come up with a novel, efficient solution based on the standard shaders. With over 12 teraflops of FP32 compute, RDNA also allows for double that with FP16. Yes, rapid packed math is back. However, machine learning workloads often use much lower precision than that. So the RDNA 2 shaders were adapted still further to support 8-bit and 4-bit integer, meaning that AI-based workloads are accelerated to a certain extent and are very much on the table with Series X. However, the big innovation is clearly the addition of hardware-accelerated ray tracing. Now, this is hugely exciting, and at Digital Foundry we've been tracking the evolution of this new technology via the DXR and Vulkan-powered games we've seen running on NVIDIA's RTX cards. We've been saying that it's not NVIDIA proprietary technology. We've been saying that it's a standard that others will follow, and well, here you go. For the first time here, not only are you seeing ray tracing running on a console, you're seeing it running on an AMD GPU. Minecraft DXR here is the result of one man's work over a month, using the Minecraft RTX ray tracing work that we've seen previously as the basis for what's playing out right now on screen. This is all possible exactly because ray tracing isn't a proprietary technology, and it's all being routed through Microsoft's DirectX ray tracing API. RDNA 2 fully supports the latest DXR Tier 1.1 standard, and similar to the Turing RT core, it accelerates the creation of the so-called BVH structures required to accurately map ray traversal and intersections tested against geometry. In short, in the same way that light bounces in the real world, the hardware acceleration for ray tracing maps traversal and intersection of light at a rate of up to 380 billion intersections per second. If Series X didn't have hardware RT, those workloads could run on the standard shaders. Only problem being, it would consume 13 teraflops of compute alone. The new console can offload those workloads and run them in parallel with the standard shaders. So in this specific scenario, effectively you're getting a peak 25 teraflops of performance while ray tracing. It's important to put this into context, however. While workloads can operate at the same time across the RT hardware and the shaders, calculating the BVH structure is only one component of the ray tracing procedure. The standard shaders in the GPU also need to pull their weight, so elements like the lighting calculations still run on the standard shaders. So yes, RT is typically associated, from what we've seen so far in the PC space, with a drop in performance, and that will carry across to the console implementation. But with the benefits of a fixed console design, we should expect to see developers optimize more aggressively and also to innovate. And the good news is that Microsoft allows low-level access to the RT acceleration hardware beyond DXR, letting developers push this technology still further. Now, what I like about the fact that Microsoft demonstrated Minecraft as a ray tracing demo is that what we're seeing here is the purest form of RT that there is, path tracing. So aside from the skybox and the moon, there's no standard rasterization being used in this Series X demo at all. It's all fully ray traced, and on a console, I think that's pretty incredible. So we did ask the Coalition how they may consider using ray tracing, and they reminded us that software RT is already built into Gears 5, powering shadows and the new screen space global illumination system. These systems could be accelerated by offloading to the RT hardware. Hybrid rendering, basically. In short though, sky's the limit. Expect that hardware to be used in very different, very innovative ways. The GPU also supports mesh shading, a new feature that is present in NVIDIA's Turing architecture, as you can see in the demo here. But now, for the first time, this will be arriving for consoles and indeed presumably for AMD GPUs. And this should allow for much more complex geometry without much in the way of CPU overhead. So I think at this point, the power of this new chip is pretty potent. There are some other pretty amazing facts too, like the fact that this exact chip is capable of being used in the next-gen xCloud servers. And this one processor can be virtualized to support 4 Xbox One S game instances. It's also a new 3D audio processor, so the whole process of calculating how sound presents, how it bounces, well, that's all taken care of at the hardware level. We've already talked about ray tracing, but conceivably this system could pair with the hardware RT to accurately process how audio bounces depending on the materials present in the environment. Exciting stuff, but there's been a lot of buzz about the transition to SSD for next gen, and I think the hype is real. So yeah, solid state storage. Yes, it's fast, with Microsoft delivering a rated 2.4 gigabytes per second of raw I/O throughput. Some 40 times faster than current gen. But that's just the beginning, really. Well look, here it is. It's a custom NVMe drive, very different to any other kind of SSD you might have seen before. Shorter for starters, presenting more like a memory card of old. It's also surprisingly substantial, rather heavy, likely down to the solid metal construction that acts as a heatsink designed to handle thermals on the silicon that consume anything up to about 3.8 to 4 watts of power. Now, problem with many PC SSDs is that they fade in performance terms as they heat up, and similar to the Series X's CPU and GPU clocks, the idea of fluctuating performance wasn't acceptable to Microsoft, who believed that consistent performance across the board is a must for the design of their consoles. Now, the form factor is cute. The 2.4 gigabytes per second of guaranteed throughput is impressive, but it's the software APIs and custom hardware built into the SoC that deliver what Microsoft believes to be a revolution, a new way of using storage to augment memory. The idea, in basic terms at least, is pretty straightforward. The game package, the game install if you like, sits on the storage, and it essentially can act almost like extended memory, allowing 100 gigabytes of game assets to be instantly accessible by the developer. It's a system that Microsoft calls its Velocity architecture, and the SSD itself is just one part of the system. Dedicated hardware blocks within the Series X SoC offload decompression work from the CPU and can deliver over 6 gigabytes per second of data. Now, I/O protocols are getting on for 30 years old at this point and have a ton of overhead, so prior to Microsoft engineering a new solution, overhead and decompression would have sucked up 5 entire Zen 2 CPU cores. A custom decompression tech and a new direct storage API reduce all of this down to 1/10 of one Zen CPU core, meaning that the asset streaming inherent in games can be radically improved, perhaps explaining the tremendous level of variety and detail we saw in that Hellblade 2 teaser. 16 gigs of RAM on its own obviously isn't a generational leap as we know it. The price of G6 is prohibitively high still, so direct storage essentially allows developers to tap into the game package stored on the SSD almost like an extension to traditional memory, and optimizing texture streaming is a priority. And therein lies another cool enhancement. Crazy but true, Microsoft built in hardware to Xbox One X to closely monitor how textured data is used by game titles, and the firm discovered that only a small proportion of the texture is actually presented on screen. In effect, 1/3 to 1/2 of the allocated memory was being used, the rest wasn't. Enhanced texture streaming that attempts to target the data that's actually needed is now built into direct storage. And yes, Microsoft considers this to be a game changer. It is even described as a multiplier in how physical memory is used. So in theory at least, you'll get much more detailed, richer worlds, but underpinning it all is a huge win in terms of actual efficiency. But the Velocity architecture goes further, and Quick Resume is a pretty amazing feature, allowing users to cycle between saved game states with just a few seconds of loading. When you leave a game, system RAM is cached off to SSD, and when you access another game, its cache is restored to memory. From the perspective of the game itself, it doesn't really have any idea of what's happening in the background. It simply thinks that the user has pressed the guide button, and the game resumes as per normal. So we got some footage here of the system being used on actual Series X hardware. The idea is that the feature can support 3 or 4 Series X games simultaneously, but titles that use less memory, like the games that you're seeing demonstrated here, well, because they're from a prior generation with lower amounts of memory used, they have a lower footprint, meaning that more of these games can be cached. The idea is that power and speed are key foundational pillars of the Series X experience, but we also discovered key technological details behind the previously announced Dynamic Latency Input System, DLI. It's a top-to-bottom revamp of input processing, and I think it's pretty impressive. It starts with a controller where the typical 8 milliseconds latency on analog controller input is now reduced significantly by transmitting the most up-to-date inputs just before the game needs them. Digital inputs like button presses are time-stamped and sent to the game, reducing latency without the need to increase the polling rate, while USB-connected pads see digital inputs transmitted immediately to the console. To facilitate all of this, the entire input software stack was rewritten, which delivered further latency improvements in and of itself. So the theory here, faster reactions, crisper response. Latency has been a crucial but somewhat invisible variable for developers to contend with, and as game engines grow more complex and more parallel, it's not easy to keep track of how latency stacks up within the engine. Something else Microsoft attempts to resolve with DLI. Internal identifiers allow developers to track input lag through the engine and out to the display, making analysis of lag as easy and as immediate as a frame rate counter. Not only that, but the new wave of HDMI 2.1 displays means that technologies like 120Hz refresh and variable rate refresh reduce latency still further. I mean, if your screen is getting new visual information to you sooner, this all stands to reason, right? Microsoft has even worked with display manufacturers to deliver ALLM, Auto Low Latency Mode. Essentially, the Xbox console can beam a command over HDMI to your TV, telling it to automatically engage game mode. I mean, this in itself could save at least 50 milliseconds of lag, depending on what TV you own. Maybe even more than that. Some of the lag on these screens is remarkable. Anyway, while enhancements and optimizations, not to mention a new share button, are added to the Xbox Series X controller, the good news is that the DLI technology is compatible with existing Xbox One pads, which should be upgradable with a simple firmware update. So, going back to the SoC here, AMD has worked with Microsoft to deliver full hardware backwards compatibility with current gen systems. Untouched, Xbox One and Xbox One X code will run natively on Series X, and even without any kind of special tooling from Microsoft's Back-Compat team, those titles will instantly benefit from full CPU and GPU clocks. So yeah, obviously we will be rolling out a whole bunch of titles, including our favourite Wolfenstein: The New Colossus with dynamic resolution scaling disabled, to really put this through its paces. But I think it's actually going to be the more CPU limited games on Xbox that may see more dramatic improvements. Thing is though, even though hardware compatibility is already baked in at the silicon level, the Xbox compatibility team haven't rested on their laurels, and I've got some cool stuff to share with you today. First of all, even without really tapping into the strengths of the Velocity architecture, just running old Xbox games from SSD offers a huge time saving in terms of loading times. As you can see here, as we boot up State of Decay 2 running on Xbox One X on the left and Series X on the right. Yeah, just to stress here, there is no Series X port of this game. This is the X version loading faster. And once it's loaded in, you may also notice that textures are streaming in a lot faster than they do on Xbox One X. Again, this is a simple factor of just running this from SSD. But this is where the really cool stuff kicks in. Microsoft hinted at increased resolution in Back-Compat games in Phil Spencer's recent Series X blog post. And I suspected that this was about more than just running dynamic resolution scaling titles and giving them a big chunk of extra GPU power. And well, check this out. This is Gears of War Ultimate Edition running with a 2x resolution scale on both axes, taking a game that was originally 1080p on Xbox One all the way up to native 4K. It's an evolution of the Haichi method we saw on Xbox One X, and back then it was used to bring Xbox 360 720p titles up to full 4K, with often spectacular results. Crucially, the Back-Compat team does all of the heavy lifting at the system level. Game developers do not need to participate at all in the process. Now, this can't be rolled out for all games. It'll be like those old X-enhanced 360 games in that sense, but man, Xbox One games running at 4K? It's pretty cool, right? Further goodies were to come, and owners of HDR screens are going to love this one. We got to see the Xbox One X enhanced version of Halo 5 operating with a very convincing HDR implementation, even though 343 Industries never actually shipped the game with HDR support. A machine learning based algorithm used the brilliant Gears 5 HDR implementation as the basis on which to analyze pretty much any kind of video content, figure out what should be displayed with HDR highlights, and then roll it all out in real time to the display with no CPU, GPU or memory overhead. Now, we can't really show you this effect in an SDR video, but this Halo 5 visualization uses heat mapping tied to luminance with a peak brightness of 10,000 nits. You can see that scale there. The closer to white the color in the heat map is, the closer to 10,000 nits we're getting. On the left there, you can see how little, in fact nothing, moves out of the SDR space. This is Halo 5's standard presentation. On the right, you'll immediately notice that HDR highlights that the algorithm is adding. Okay, so the increased resolution we saw with Gears Ultimate is a bespoke implementation that the compatibility team roll out for specific titles, but the great news is that this new Auto HDR feature is a system level feature that should in theory roll out to any game. We were even shown HDR running on Fusion Frenzy, an OG Xbox game that came out, what, 18, 19 years ago, when HDR wasn't really a thing at all. Now I really wish I could show you this working as opposed to some stock Fusion Frenzy footage, but it was a really show-stopping moment. It looked great. Of course, as well as the HDR, you get the usual 16 times resolution multiplier provided for OG Xbox games running on Xbox One X and indeed the Series X. I've got to wonder what the original developers of this game are going to think when they see this. Exciting stuff then, I mean extremely exciting stuff. John and I spent a day and a half at the Microsoft campus, and really the entirety of this video is just the tip of the iceberg really. The broadest of outlines. There's a whole story to tell about the construction of the console, why it is the shape that it is, and why the internals of this device look nothing like any other console I've ever seen before. Obviously we'd like to go deeper into the GPU, into the graphics features, especially with the ray tracing side of the equation, which is far, far more fully featured and ambitious than I really expected. Obviously, Alex has much to say about that, and indeed the Minecraft DXR demo, so yeah, look out for that coverage. And the Gears demo that we saw, well again, we had an in-depth presentation of this from the Coalition, and there's a ton more to share. I think one of the big takeaways for me was the announcement that selected existing Xbox One games like Gears 5 are getting Series X upgrades. Now which titles they will be beyond Gears 5 remains to be seen. But yeah, we all have our favourites, don't we? Anyway, going live with this video is a DF Direct filmed in Redmond, where John and I discuss our first actual impressions of real hardware. I mean, we've been hands-on with that. We've done our real-life Xbox One X versus Series X form factor comparisons. So yes, check that out. Essential viewing. But rest assured, there's a huge amount of stuff we've yet to share, and you can expect to see more, much more, from Digital Foundry. But that's all from me for now. I mean, come on, you know the score by now, surely. Liking, subscribing, sharing, this is all good stuff, as is pointing, clicking, or whatever else you need to do to ring the notification bell to be informed whenever Digital Foundry posts new content. The DF Patreon. If you like what we do, if you want to support the work we do more directly and make a real difference to this channel, and indeed get pristine quality video downloads of everything we do, well, please consider that. But that's all from me for now. Thanks for watching and indeed supporting Digital Foundry. And remember, next gen, this really is just the beginning.